This evening we begin a new series of discussions, and our general subject is the orientation of Hermetic philosophy. In all of these courses, we are attempting in every way possible to present the material without depriving the student of the right to arrive at certain conclusions of his own. In other words, where certain reasonable doubts exist, where conflict or contradiction is present, we will say so, in order that we shall at least have solid ground as far as we can go. And in the case of the Hermetic philosophy, we cannot go as far as we wish that we could. In the first place, the entire origin of this field of thought is utterly obscure. All that we have is a group of definitely conflicting reports. But out of the conflict itself, and out of the very circumstances which surround the times and conditions associated with the beginning of the school, we gain some very useful and practical insight. So we will try to sketch the field first historically. It is generally assumed that the only material that we have relating to the general subject of Hermetic philosophy originates in the writings of the ante-Nicene father Clement of Alexandria. Clemens Alexandrinus includes in his work a considerable discussion of a system of Egyptian ritualistic, symbolical, magical metaphysics, which was prevalent at his time. And he wrote with the perspective of the late 1st and early 2nd century A.D. Clement does not, however, actually approach the central problem, namely, who was Hermes. Thus we have to seek in other directions, not nearly as factual or as comprehensive. The standard texts of the present time do not have any general knowledge of how what is called the corpus hermeticum came into existence. The corpus is composed or made up of a series of writings attributed to a mysterious person called Hermes, and often referred to either as Hermes Trismegistus or Mercurius Termaximus in the Latin form. Several efforts have been made to assume that this Hermes was the Egyptian deity Thoth, Thoth, long associated with the concept of wisdom, and considered by many to have become intermixed with the Greek Hermes, particularly during the period of the Grecian pharaohs of Egypt. That is, the dynasty of the Ptolemies, the dynasty immediately preceding the beginning of the Christian era. There is no evidence of certainty, however, that the Hermes of the Hermetic school was actually the Egyptian Thoth. This, however, brings a further matter. Thoth, as a deity, was worshipped in Egypt for a very long time. It would be safe to say at least for 3,000 years before the beginning of the Christian era. The question naturally arises then, was this deity a deified human being? Did a being or creature by the name of Thoth actually exist at some remote age? The tendency now has been to suggest or suspect that many so-called deities were originally persons, and that through long periods of veneration and infallibility, a kind of deification was given to them by popular esteem. Plato declares that there were at least 5 persons by the name of Hermes in the Greek system. Therefore, that somewhere along the descent of this name, it was bestowed upon persons. Now, 2 possibilities present themselves under this thinking. The first is that the original concept of Thoth as one of the 5 elder deities of Egypt was that he was a god, and like Osiris, was originally a divine being, the basis of a general worship, at least in certain provinces and areas of Egypt. That later, this name was bestowed upon certain human beings as a title of honor or distinction. They were given names to indicate that they were Thoth-like or Hermes-like. Also, there is something to recommend the idea that early writers, recognizing Hermes as the deity of universal mind, took the position that mind is the author of all works. Therefore, that behind the human author of every product is the universal mind, who might well, therefore, be regarded as the genuine compiler, writer, or editor of the work. Thus, a work could be dedicated to the universal mind as its true author. Thus, persons in many ages could attribute their own productions, particularly those of vision and inspiration, to a deity long honored and regarded. It might then well occur that, as in other religions and in other systems, Thoth-inspired teachers were said to have arisen, becoming the embodiments or incarnations of the principle of wisdom, therefore entitled to bear this name. Certainly there were several persons by the name of Orpheus, as Taylor points out for us in his analysis of the mystical hymns of Orpheus. There was certainly more than one person in the course of time known as Zoroaster or Zarathustra. And it is quite possible that the last of the Zoroasters, who is said to have been personally known by Pythagoras, was by no means the first of these fire prophets, but was a distinguished philosopher or mystic or illuminata who had received this name as an honorary title. Thus it is quite conceivable that the name of Thoth or Hermes, because of the peculiar sphere of influence over which this deity was said to rule, could well have been associated with human beings, whereas many other deities might not so readily adapt themselves to this process of humanization, or this process of perpetual or periodic re-embodiment. We then have another thought, which is rather daring, has not perhaps received too much consideration, but might be worth a second glance. Namely,